So we're going to transition really quickly now to a panel to answer any questions that you have of the speakers or any topics we didn't get to. We have half an hour, so it will be short, but we'll just give our speakers a moment to come up here. Can we have the mic to pass around, please? Great. So let's get started. One of the questions that someone brought up to me during the break was, we've talked a lot about customer journey mapping and how that's so important to the customer experience. What are some of your favorite tools or BI or AI that you're using to drive these improvements in your operations?
So maybe my answer is the easiest because we're actually not using a lot of tools. And in fact, the whole customer journey mapping is something we really need to do a lot more of. But we are doing listing. So I think the folks from Kaiser talked about their process. We're doing some very simple and simplistic things about, sitting in our emergency department waiting rooms and listening to patients. But we have a lot more opportunity to deploy some of the more sophisticated tools.
Sorry, and when you talked about AI and BI, you mean artificial intelligence and business intelligence. And to Chuck's point, I think at least in our methodology, in our approach to defining the customer journey, we do not use tools to facilitate those workshops. However, we bring technology experts with disruptive ideas into those workshops so that we embed the disruptive technologies into the workshop, but we don't use the technology to facilitate the workshop. But yes, this is I'm not sure where the question comes from and what's the objective, but yes, technology is embedded completely in the fabric of the customer journey because we want to be disruptive, right? We don't want, we could just deliver what our users want, but what we want is to wow our users, a bit like Apple that created needs that we didn't need, right, a few years ago. Who thought of an iPhone, an iPad, and all this? So as we think about our user experience, we want to use those technologies and bring the expert that can challenge us so that we have that wow moment and say, wow, yeah, we can not only deliver what the great experience desired by our users, but we can actually leapfrog it or even exceed it through those workshops.
So I think this is actually a great area of opportunity, and I think there's a lot of tools yet to emerge in this space. I think when it comes to customer journey mapping, we'll use everything, from PowerPoint to whatever the Visio tool to create the maps. Where I think the opportunity is, and interesting around AI being brought into that is. We're actually working now in the healthcare space a little bit around automating the customer journey. So once you've got it mapped out, is building that in a tool set where you can basically dashboard it. So if you think about the concept of customer service calls coming in and the ability then to analyze those for emotion and sentiment, now you've got the opportunity to in real time start assessing where you are in terms of the customer journey. So how your customers feeling, how your patient's feeling right now, based on real-life feedback that's coming through. So there are tools emerging in that space. I think they're definitely going to take it to the next stage.
From a Kaiser perspective, I think one of the things that we're working on right now is, at least in the buy-to-pay space, which is sort of sits on the back end and not necessarily in the clinical setting, is we're really looking at sort of a single front door in and a single front door out, and then we're using emerging technology or sort of automation and emerging technologies to help us with how our customers interface with us, and using like a tier 1 and a tier 2 approach for that, where self-service is really on the front end and letting them reach out and get the information that they want, and where they can't get what they need on the first try, then using that technology to drive it down to a real life person with them really not knowing that, giving them sort of the tools up front to do that work.
Other questions from the audience?
Could you just continue to expand on that? Things, not necessarily BI and reporting, but predictive. So understanding the journey and how you're able to consider next best actions for the customers. They do X, you know they're likely to do Y based on your other ethnographic research, and how you might incorporate that in different industries.
Yeah, I think it's a lot simpler than BI and AI. So I'll take an example of talent acquisition, right? If you post a job, you're gonna get resumes in, right? The manager's then gonna have to review those resumes and pick X number of people, and then you're gonna go into an interviewing phase, and then once you go through that interview, there's gonna be an offer made, right? And one of the things that we observed is there's really no connector between all of those steps. Currently, we ask the manager to be that connector, right? He's the person, or she's the person that follows up with each step as you go along, versus just having, we use Salesforce as our case management tool. You could close one case and shoot a new case to the next step in the process, right? And so that way the manager isn't having to chase the next person down the line. It can just flow to that person. They know that they need to do the next step, and they can contact the manager proactively, right? So you take this in and out of, there's a lot of HR processes, what I described around P2P earlier today. It's very dependent on that customer being the linkage versus where they're gonna go, right? And just teeing it up versus relying on them to get there, so.
Okay, can I just add so I think there are those two steps, right? We first described the customer journey definition, and then there's this implementation. So you talked about the implementation and how then we can use workflows or typical workflow tools, but also our workflow on steroids, right? So it could be Salesforce, ServiceNow. We have so many workflow tools that can help us implement those completely redesigned processes. But this is a two-step approach, right? Let's first lock ourselves in a room, redefine the customer journey for a given process, P2P, A2R, in our case, a customer invoice to cash as well, and the different employee services within the hire to retire process. And then once we're done with that, and we have completely bulletproof this process with the right technology, and we wire ourselves, then we can say, okay, now let's implement it with the right workflows because those disruptive and newly redefined processes, well, they cannot live on paper or on PowerPoint or on phone calls and emails. They need to be completely automated. And this is where the right workflow tool kicks in. Interestingly enough, we saw a lot of vendors, and when I met with them, the question was, okay, what differentiates you from the ones in the magic quadrant, the big bulldozers? Do you have any creative idea how can you integrate the customer journey into those new customer journey disruptive technologies into your workflows? I haven't seen yet very strong answers, but but it's hard. It's a very, very hard process.
Try to elaborate a little more.
Sure.
So maybe not so much on the operational side of the workflow and how you manage your business, but using the customer journey to anticipate the customer's next action. So if you're a personal lines insurer and you know that there's a household with an 18-year-old in it, they might be going to school and they might be taking a car with them, and proactively saying, do you want to update your housing or your garaging address for the car? Or using the life events to take the journey and then use predictive capabilities to say, I know what you're doing and I'm going to predict what you're about to do to make that an easier transition or journey. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, I'm on board. I think you're just at another level of proactivity, around taking that customer journey to the next level, right? I think to be honest, we've done it 3 or 4 times, right? We haven't done it, widespread across the organization. So, but I think those are great examples of how you can really be proactive and use the journey to predict what people are really going to do. So, I applaud your thinking. I think it's fantastic.
I think the only thing that I would add to that I would just caution on, at least from my experience, is the human element to that, right? So there's clearly the predictive analytics that you're talking about, but there's also that personalized customer journey that I think you just have to train for that, with your team, so that they don't lose that and feel like they're a machine. There's still a feeling associated with that, and you have to keep that in mind. Is the only thing I'm thinking.
So just a couple of thoughts on that. I totally agree with what you're saying. And if you think about it in terms of, take USAA, for example, where you're focusing very much around the life event itself. The more you do that, the more you learn about how people transact through that life event, the more you can predict how that's going to happen in the future. And the more you can build up that demographic data around those particular types of customers, the smarter you can get. Right, so it's not only bringing in your own data, transactional data, and what you know about the customers, it's going out and finding out what else you can find out through social media or whatever, that you can build up that picture of that individual. So I think the nirvana, and this is where you get to the crux in my mind, is you want to be able to do that marketing, if you will, the persona marketing, so that you've got an audience of one. So I know exactly who I'm marketing to, and it's very personalized. And the paradox there is that as human beings, we naturally push back against that. And it says, I want you to know enough that you can be really effective in your communications with me, but I don't want you to know enough about me that it gets creepy, right? So that's really the balance, I think. But I think it's almost beyond the customer journeys in my mind. It's about just understanding how you can leverage the data, using AI as well, to make that very predictive, that if you see a certain trend in the data, you're making a bet that, okay, you're on a journey, I'm going to help you on that journey by putting an offer in front of you that I think is going to be attractive to you.
I'm sorry, just to capitalize on this, I mean, USA example, they're known for having defined their use cases, right? They understand their clients very well and their use cases, and that's what we try to do with our own methodologies to do. And I would say there is an upstream and a downstream. So upstream, before even launching any workshop on customer journey, let's first define the use cases. I mean, let's not create a user, we're not a charity or whatever. We don't have, we don't have unlimited resources, right? So before launching a workshop on a given customer journey, let's define the series of use cases that we will address. And so that's up front. Then we launch our customer journey workshop, mixed with VSM. And then we operationalize it with the workflows that will have all the capabilities to retrieve the data, because the AI tools are nice, but they need to rely on reliable data. And until you have implemented your workflows, automation, timestamps, and all demographics with metadata, then you can't collect reliable data. So again, going back upstream, identifying very clearly the use cases, so we don't just do a workshop for no reason. Focus on those use cases, and then hopefully the rest unfolds quite nicely.
A couple of thoughts here just to sort of wrap this up, and I think just sharing experience from the Google perspective, where I ran customer experience for a number of our products. I think the insights here are spot on. It's very easy to apply a lot of technology to this space and forget the human element of, we have, for example, I'll never forget, there was this, we're analyzing different types of customers who use Android devices and trying to map out their journey, and there was one customer support specialist that I was shadowing on the day. So again, old school, you're just on the floor listening to calls, trying to figure it out. And it was a grandmother who had called in to say, hey, I'm having trouble setting up this tablet. And offline, the customer support specialist said, and it was around Thanksgiving, he said, you know, I bet her grandkids are coming and she wants to, the next question she probably doesn't know yet is she's going to need to download some movies from the Play Store. I'm going to ask her about it. And I sort of watched that whole thing unfold, and lo and behold, that was her next question, but she would have probably taken another call or another 2 calls if we didn't have someone who was thinking about what she might be going through, right? And we have Google users that come to various help forums. So going back to the more BI or business intelligence aspect, we actually data mine that to see where do people go? What kind of topics do they land on first? Then what do they click on? Then where do they go? Then where do they go? How much time do they spend on each topic? It's not totally predictive, but it tells you the customer thought process and the kinds of challenges they're having. So you combine that real world, just really sit in the shoes of the customer. Don't presume too much, because maybe she was a very tech-savvy grandmother, right? So you have to be really careful there. But again, you can also mine some data. But I think if you're combining the old school, I'm a big believer in just walk the floor, shadow the workflow, talk to your customers with the data, I think you'll end up in a really good place. We had a question.
Yeah, going back to what you were saying, don't we find it creepy because we are from this generation, and don't we have to evolve to adapt to the newer generations? My 14-year-old doesn't find it creepy that I get in my feed in Facebook something that we were just Googling or discussing at home. For him, it's not creepy. For me, it's horrible. I feel that I'm getting spied on. But perhaps we have to evolve to anticipate the needs of that generation, not ours.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. And I would counter that a little bit by saying he doesn't necessarily have the purse strings right now. So he's less concerned about it, maybe. But I think it's a really good point. I think people are generally more accepting in the next generation, so we'll see how that unfolds. But it's only going to become more and more prevalent, right, that we're getting these intrusions. And we've got to get better at it, because, you know, to your point, I often find that I get those ads popping up in social media when I've already completed the transaction. It's like, oh, get smart, guys, I've already done it, you know? Stop following me around. Yeah, that's a really good point.
So just to kind of build on that whole point, I actually recently attended a design seminar where we talked about millennials, and one of the things that really brought home to me that I hadn't thought that much about is how you design the customer experience based on the different kind of socio-psychological pieces from different generations. Millennials, I think we all know, and especially from my more advanced age, think very differently about waiting, about interactions and those things than, say, people of, you know, the boomer generation or Gen X or Gen Y. And as that evolves, you have to really think about, I think, the design of that experience has to take that into account, and yet you also have to design for all the other people who are still using your services.
Too much, but I think you got a very interesting point, which is also setting priorities. We decided not to kill ourselves and try to resolve or boil the ocean and address all customers at any price. We can't do it, right? We're never going to achieve it. So it's about segmentation, and what you point out is there is different segments of the population, and then we need to prioritize them. And perhaps the millennials are our future, are the future of our processes, perhaps in external customers for you, Chuck, or internal customers, Ted and I mean, but we need to segment that population and be clear. And once we once we're clear that, okay, our population, our target population include those millennials, those old-timers, then we can go ahead. But I think there is that step, I think as perhaps you were alluding to, that let's define our population, let's segment, let's make sure that we're not scattered around and trying to do everything and then achieve nothing. So, but yes, it impacts so much then the processes. This is a new category of client, of customers that we didn't think about.
Any other questions from the floor? We have time for about one or two more. Sure. So the question is, what do you see as the next steps for customer journey mapping? Is it sort of immediately on the horizon, the next 2 to 3 years? Where do you see it going within your organization? Did I get that right? Yes. Great.
Yeah, I think for us, it's really making the internal customers who are our associates happier to be a Coca-Cola employee, right? And I think in 2 or 3 years, we have a long way to go. I think the other thing that may emerge as we go along is we do have kind of business process owners right now, but I think our mindset will change more to service ownership, right? Where people will own the service end-to-end, which may cross multiple business process owners. And I think until you get that mindset, you won't really change the full customer journey end to end. But I think it's really just about thinking end to end, right? And end to end means different things to different people. It just depends on where you are in the organization, where your end starts and the other one begins. But I think it's more about understanding and collaboration too. I think, that's really what we want people to get out of it. Of, you know what, when we invited some of the marketers to come to our AP workshop, they didn't want to come. That's an AP job. I don't want to go work on AP for 4 days. Well, actually, it's all of our jobs to make it better. And if we understand you better and you understand us better, we can all be better. And so that spirit of collaboration, I think, is really what we're trying to drive with the journey mapping and kind of changing things as we go forward.
I would say from our perspective, I think one of the things we're doing is we're even taking it maybe a step further than that, in that we're sort of going down this road of everyday process improvement, and so we're actually empowering every single person to have that idea of continuous improvement. And wherever they see that opportunity, they immediately are able to do something about it. And so instead of making this journey mapping more formal, we're actually making it less formal by creating those opportunities when they exist. When a clinician is working with a patient and they experience something that's unpleasant, having the opportunity to do something about it right away.
Back to, I think what a couple of us have talked about is I see there's going to be more linkage between, customer journey mapping is essentially a method and a tool as part of a grander movement towards bringing us more in line with the customer success, right? So as KP have done, as we did with our client, is tying the customer journey map into the value stream and into lean, and then down into the operations. I think we're going to see more of that, so you get more breadth and depth within the capability of the customer journey map. So it's the starting point for all the change that you're going to initiate based on what you find through that customer journey map process.
I would just add one piece to that puzzle. So we mentioned a few pieces of that a few pieces of that puzzle of the customer journey of the future. And that's disruptive technologies that we don't know yet. So what we need to do is be ready to, so do enough technology watch so that we detect those new technology, disruptive technologies, and be able to quickly revise our customer journey, be ready to launch a new workshop or whatever to integrate that quickly, so that we don't look of the passé, of the past, right? So we don't so we're really at the forefront of the customer experience. So that's a challenge for us, the practitioners of operational excellence.
I think just building on your point, Bernard, I think one of the challenges that we found with customer journey mapping is knowing when you have enough to actually start taking action, right? Because there's a great level of detail you can go into in a customer journey map, and many of our customer journeys require lots of different perspectives to be completed. At the same time, when you see something that's so obviously wrong with a process, when do you say, you know what, this is not complete, but I'm going to take action on this piece to ease that part of the customer journey, while we sort of keep learning more as we engage more deeply with the customer. So for us, it's about prioritizing which customer journeys we should go after, because there's so many. I mean, even the definition of a customer for a company like Google is very broad. But then within that, when do you actually start taking action, and when do you say, no, I need to get a much more comprehensive view? So I think for us, it's a bit of a continuous journey. So we have time for maybe one more question, or if we don't have any, we can wrap as well. Sure.
All right, just one. So, we hear a lot of expertise on everything that you're doing here, and a lot of structure. Do we ever consider about how we could partner together with different companies to really find a bigger solution and not repeat a lot of this ourselves? I'm just interested to, I work with Johnson & Johnson, just wondering, as a group, do you ever work and really collaborate with another major vendor or major supplier or partner to really have drawing on this, learn from each other? How do we do this? How do we learn from each other much quicker and stronger?
Yes, so our leader, who really works for the CFO, so the CEO of the company, so it's really at the top, he really challenged us to do a couple of things. Is to do, I think this is your question, is to benchmark with the best. So you mentioned Johnson & Johnson, and we need to, benchmark with them, so that's one thing. What we do also partner with, for example, we want to develop customer service competencies within our teams. So what does that mean? Let's look for the best, and we are about to partner with the École Hôtelière de Lausanne, so a Swiss hotelry school or hotel management school, because those guys are. If you go to if you want to take your spouse to a nice restaurant, go to a 3-star Michelin restaurant or whatever, but you will see you're wowed by an experience that it's a one time in your life experience. And so what we want to do is partner with those guys, and we're about to send our people to be trained in that environment, to see what is perfection, what is customer service, how we anticipate. So we're partnering with those type of providers. We also partnering and about again to partner with other consulting firms, but not to bring them as on a consulting assignment, but to send our people within their walls to work with the leaders in terms of customer service, in terms of technologies. So we're immersed in that environment, so that we're about to send 100 employees. I mean, this is our objective. We still don't know how we're going to do it, but send all employees in the walls of, I can't say the name of the companies, but companies that are at the forefront of the technology and customer service. So it's a big challenge. We're trying to figure out how we're going to do it. But yes, I think this is also the future. We need to partner, not just come to this conference where we exchange ideas, but also take it to action and show up at and create alliances with other groups, like-minded companies.
Kaiser has an innovation center in the middle of the commercial district. It's called the Sidney R. Garfield Innovation Center. And it's where, it's basically a warehouse where we prefabricated a hospital ward, and we use that. It has an operating room in there, but we use that to test new technologies in the clinical setting. And we're actually using any of the learnings from that are actually shared with our partners throughout the world, and people come in all the time to see what we've done in that space. And so I think we're doing it where I haven't learned how to do that. Is that in my particular job, but it seems like the company's really getting it right, and that we need to do more, in other, functional areas of the company. But from a medicine perspective, it seems like with the Kaiser Health Foundation, we also do a lot of work when saying, these two diagnoses together could turn out to be this, and sharing all of that information. But, tons more work, sort of in my space, which is, sort of enterprise resource planning, and how we would do that across, with some of our competitors is an area where we still need to grow.
So I think with that, thank you everyone. We're at time. I really want to thank the speakers for coming here today, preparing these presentations. It was enriching to be in the audience and be a part of this. Thank you.